to turn this into the shell for a snare drum. It has been made up of 16 individual staves glued together, and because of that it is not round like a cylinder, and I will need a jig to both cut off the high spots, round it out, and then also give it the final diameter for my shell, which should be 13 7/8 inches. This jig will help me turn that into a cylinder. So it's going to round off the edges by squeezing here, shell placed here. This will squeeze up against it tight, and then it spins on this bar over the router table bit, and it will round out my shell. I picked this design because I liked how simple it was, and this one simply can be clamped to my router table and can easily spin over the router bit, and can also be quickly taken off if I need to adjust the height of the bit, put back on, and get back to work. If I ever want to create a shell with a different diameter, I can change out the supports here. If it's anything bigger, I might need to swap these guys out. But yeah, anyway, that's the idea, is to clamp the shell in this piece and spin it over the router bit. My jig is made out of laminated pieces of plywood, 3 strips per base and 2 per support. The base strips should be about 3 inches wide and 23 inches long. The length was determined by my router table dimensions, as I wanted to be able to clamp the ends on my table. One thing I didn't realize until after I laminated the pieces together was that the bevel angle for my blade was not set correctly, so these cuts weren't exactly square. Thankfully, this didn't really affect anything for the jig, because squaring everything up afterwards was pretty simple. After the plywood strips are cut, I can go ahead and glue and clamp them together. Ugh, that glue is looking a little suspect. All oily and separated. Anyway, I went ahead and just crossed my fingers and used it anyway. Figured I could always try to glue it up again. Didn't seem to affect anything. Honestly, if you just want to use 4x4 and 2x6 stock, this lamination step can surely be avoided. I just didn't have any of that, and had plywood, so I thought I'd go the glue up route instead. Once the glue dries, I start laying out where I would like the bolts that attach the supports on the base. You can see here, after I transfer the lines from one board to another, that they separate after letting go. This is what made me notice that my table saw wasn't cutting square. I didn't film any of it, but a simple blowing out of sawdust from the table saw cabinet with focus on the bevel adjustment screw did the trick. After cleaning, I went back and squared up my stock. I'm drilling holes for 5/16 inch hex bolts on the base. I made the holes oversized to allow for some slop on the supports. It makes for easier alignment, and also came in handy when I realized I cut my supports too short for the shell to properly spin over the bit. Because of the slop, I was able to shim the bottom of the supports, which added enough height to spin the shell without any issue. I mark where the rod's cutout should be on the supports. The hole should be placed at roughly half the shell's outer diameter with some added spacing. When drilling the holes for the rod, I needed to clamp down the boards to prevent the board from being pulled into the bit. This was because the bit I used was self-feeding and has a screw-like tip to pull into the workpiece. After the holes are drilled, I cut the tops of the supports. I forgot to hit the record button when I did this, but I used a sled for my table saw to perform the cut. Here I'm drilling the holes for the bolts that attach the supports to the base. After this is done, it is time for me to work on the jaws for the clamp that will hold my shell in place on the rod. I use a circle cutting jig for my router to cut out the shape of the jaws. This jig rotates the router around a nail to create the shape I want.
I didn't want to put a sacrificial board underneath the one I was cutting, so I didn't cut all the way through. I went just deep enough so that the guide bearing of a template routing bit could be used. I go to the bandsaw to cut close to the desired shape before going to the router table. Even though I didn't want to go all the way through my board, I should have gone deeper than I did. I had to remove quite a bit at the table here. After I cut out the other jaw, I temporarily stick them together with double stick tape and drill the holes for the bolts. Now that all the pieces are cut and drilled, I assemble all the parts. I bolt the supports to the base and bolt the clamp jaws together. And back to the drill press to cut out the center hole that I forgot about. And that's it. The jig is ready to go. The jig helped me round the shell quickly using several light passes. I had some concerns before using it about the bar simply resting on top of the supports, but at no time during its use did I feel like it wasn't secure enough. I'm definitely looking forward to using this on many drum shells. Thanks for watching.